Join us by the fireside for our evening tales of true life's strange experiences with things that lie beyond the veil of the known and into the misty depths of the mysterious and unknown. The Doll in the Attic. 2 years after my dad's death, he died of cancer, my mom decided we needed to move out of the city and move to a rural part of South Carolina. This all happened almost 3 years ago when I was 18. I'm a guy, by the way. So me, my sister, she was 10 back then, and mom packed all of our stuff, hired a moving van, and left behind our memory-filled house, which was now sold. We lived in Chicago, so it was a long drive, but it was a nice late summer day, not terribly hot. We had rented a house in a small town while Mom would look for the right home for us to buy and move into permanently. She thought renting was such a waste of money, and I knew she was in a hurry to just find something and buy it. At least it would be an investment too. So we arrived at a boring townhouse area, in a cookie-cutter suburban neighborhood, and as soon as we arrived, Mom made a face and said, "Oh God, the sooner we move out of this, the better." So we moved in, and of course, Mom had her hands full looking for a house, homeschooling my sister Jess, and planning the future, researching places to live, etc. She wanted to live in a peaceful rural community, outside a small town or even more remote, since she worked from home anyways and I was doing an online degree, so we were all three of us mostly home-based. This was just after the pandemic started and everyone was getting nervous. So after viewing countless houses and almost giving up, Mom was home one early evening when the realtor called. The realtor, Amy, said she found an old house with lots of charm and history and for an amazing price. Would she, Mom, be interested in viewing it and possibly making an offer? She sent all the details of the listing in an email, which Mom showed us for feedback. Seriously, it looked amazing, like an old classic plantation house out of a movie. But it also looked kind of creepy. And we laughed about that, at the same time. It came with 10 acres of land around it, mostly kind of thickly wooded with a creek running through, some old sheds, a barn, and some other old stuff just sort of rusting around it. The house needed a lot of work, but it was currently livable, though not very modernized. Last time it had been fully inhabited was over 40 years ago, apparently, but it had been maintained in a basic way by the owner, who didn't live there, by the way, ever since, just to stop it from decaying completely and totally just losing value. So the property was only selling for $250,000, which was really low for the size of the land and also the house, which was an 8-bedroom mansion, really. So suffice it to say, we were all pretty excited to go see it, and since it was such a bargain, we didn't want to lose it. So we said to Amy that we'd like to view it the following morning, first thing. Amy agreed, and the following morning we followed her car there. It was a 40-minute drive from the townhouse on the freeways, and then there was this old highway. And then from the old highway, you took this long dirt road and then this long driveway through the woods that came with the house. Eventually, we arrived right in front, facing the home, and it was like, we had seen in the photos of the listing. It was huge and definitely a nice, spacious home. built for a large family and probably servants too, back in the day, and also to entertain and impress guests, I would have thought. I didn't feel we needed a massive home like that, but I know Mom well enough to know that once she has her mind set on something, no one can get her to change it. So I just gave up trying and I just let her have her way. We got out of the car and we met the realtor as she stepped out of her car. Jess, for whatever reason, didn't want to go in. And she was busy talking to her best friend, and texting and on her phone and so on. And she was just sitting in the back seat of the car. So Mom and I and the realtor went to look inside the house. I could see it definitely needed some work and, on the outside as well. It looked rather abandoned and creepy, to be honest. All the outside was treed, but open too because the trees were old and they were not too close together. The day had turned out pretty hot by now, and I was already wiping sweat from my neck and face, even though it was still morning. It was only when we crossed the threshold of the front door of the house that the temperature just, changed drastically. It was really chilly in there. And Amy, the realtor, commented on how strange it was, considering it was a hot day outside already. Anyways, the house was clearly old, from the early or mid-1800s. And inside, it had big, spacious rooms with a few old pieces of furniture left behind for some reason. It had a long, wide staircase that wound up to the top-level bedrooms, etc. Things were not really modernized except for the fact that it had plumbing and electricity. There were quite a lot of windows, but oddly, it felt kind of dark in there, like there was a sense of shadow that wouldn't go away, and the sun didn't want to shine in there. That's kind of how it felt. Overall, the house should have felt airy, I thought, and it should have felt light and cheerful, but instead, despite its appearance, it felt kind of heavy and dark and musty. The kitchen area was large and had an old cook stove and a sink, cupboards and counter space. There was a large old kitchen table at the center of the spacious room, too. For some reason, there was this big carving knife with a wooden handle left on the table. It looked old, too. That sort of freaked me out a bit. But, I didn't say anything. All the upstairs rooms were a decent size, and there was even an attic which we had to go up some steps to get to. The attic was full of old junky stuff like old wooden trunks, broken chairs, some moldy, dusty toys and books. We figured we'd have our work cut out for us in throwing all that old stuff out or maybe selling it to an antique dealer, perhaps. The thing that stood out the most, though, was a large old doll with black long hair and no eyes. It was standing on a chair, propped up against the chair back, staring out at me, even though it had no eyes. That's how I felt. It was like it was looking at me. A strange chill went up and down my spine as I looked at the doll. So anyway, we looked all around the house, in every room, and then the outside again to look at the sheds and the big old barn. Mom loved it, but I just kept quiet. I really didn't feel comfortable in there, especially in the attic and the upstairs. I got this weird, creepy, kind of hostile feeling that I just couldn't shake off. The house just felt gloomy, and there was an inexplicable heaviness. I decided I'd talk to Mom about it after the realtor had left us and when we were driving home. But Mom made the decision right then and there, to my horror. This was odd because normally she would have talked to both me and Jess, at least a bit, before making, big decisions like that. Although she usually just ended up doing what she wanted anyways. Yes, I'm 18, I'm an adult, and I can leave home anytime I want to. But I've decided to stay home and get my degree first because the world has become very expensive all of a sudden. So this way I can also save some money for my studies and, instead of wasting it on rent. And I also, figured that mom still needed me there since, dad had gone. So anyway, horrified as I was at her decision, I realized I'd be stuck living in that house now, and I was not looking forward to it. So mom loved the house so much that she said to Amy right away, "I love it. We'll take it." So she made an offer and it got accepted, and within a month, we moved our stuff in. Everything just seemed to fall into place really fast, and we just moved in. I remember thinking that just by the way everything fell into place so fast and so smoothly, that it seemed a bit strange, like, they were so in a hurry to get rid of the house or something. Jess wasn't bothered by it. She was too caught up with some drama or other with her circle of friends on social media. She didn't care where she lived as long as she could still access Facebook and TikTok. But she wasn't happy about leaving her friends behind and moving to another state. She, being the girl, got to pick her room first. She chose a large bedroom with 2 large tall windows as far away from mine and Mom's rooms as possible. I didn't care too much, but since I had a bad feeling in that house, I decided to claim the room next to Mom's master bedroom, just to make me feel better and ready to protect her should anything happen. I asked myself why I felt the need to protect her. But it was such a strong feeling, I just couldn't ignore it. So I set up my room the way I wanted it, moved the bed closer to the window, unpacked my stuff, put clothes in the old wardrobe that had been left there since there were no walk-in closets, and I tried to make myself at home. In the first week, Jess and I poked around the house, looking in, all the cupboards and the nooks and crannies. Jess was scared to go up to the attic after what I told her with the spooky eyeless doll, but I teased her so much about it that finally she relented and went up with me. I went ahead of her. I opened the door, turned on the dim light, and she walked in behind me. She looked around and asked, "Where is it?" in a frightened kind of voice. She stayed by the open doorway because we've both seen too many scary movies where you walk into a room and the door slams shut and then won't open. I pointed to where the doll was. Surprised, she didn't see it at first on the chair. She averted her wide, scared eyes to where I pointed, and suddenly she looked at the chair and she let out a scream that tore right through me and left me scared too. I looked round and all I saw was the eyeless doll. But why had it made her scream like that? She then tore out of the room screaming and ran down the narrow steps. I shut the door and ran down after her, but she ran into her room and slammed the door, locking it from the inside. I was both confused and concerned. Mom came running upstairs shouting, "What's going on? What happened?" I knocked on Jess's door. Mom came over worried and I explained what had happened. Mom made a face and said, "Oh, is that all? You kids have been watching too many horror movies behind my back." Then she called out to Jess to open the door. "Jess, come on, hon, open the door. I know it's an old house, but stop being silly and come out. We'll clear out the attic and throw out any scary old dolls." But Jess didn't respond. And Mom said she needed to run back downstairs because she'd left some water boiling in a pan on the stove. I talked to Jess some more through the door, and then she finally opened it. I was shocked to see how pale she suddenly looked, and that she'd been crying. She was also shaking a bit. She asked me to come in, and then she closed the door behind us. I asked her what was going on. At first, she said she didn't want to talk about it. But then she said she'd tell me, but she was clearly nervous and traumatized by something she'd seen. She also said she didn't want to sleep alone in that house. I told her she could stay in my room or Mom's. She finally, very reluctantly told me what had happened that scared her so much. Apparently, it was after I opened the door to the attic, and she saw that doll I pointed out. She said that when she looked at the doll on the chair, she thought how creepy it looked with no eyes. But then suddenly, as she looked at it closer, it opened its mouth very clearly and grinned a horrible grin with tiny needle-like teeth showing. She was so shocked by this and by the feeling of dread that came over her then that she just ran out and lost control. I knew her well enough to know she wasn't lying or exaggerating. I wondered if maybe it was just a trick of the dim light up there or something. But she swore it was no trick or illusion. She saw it 100% clearly without a doubt. Well, I was pretty freaked out by this too, and I resolved that the next morning I'd take the doll out, make a bonfire, and burn it. Jess was relieved to hear it. So the next day, Mom went up with me because Jess refused to go anywhere near the attic or the doll. Apparently, Mom hadn't even noticed it the first time we went up there. I felt very uncomfortable walking into that room again, but the morning sun shining through the window at the top made it easier to go up there. Mom, not being the type to get scared easily, went in first, and I walked behind her. I looked over at the chair where I'd seen the doll, but it wasn't there. I asked Mom if she'd moved it, but she said no, and she'd never even noticed it before. Then I wondered if Jess was pulling some kind of prank on me. What else could it be? So I went back down, ready to confront her about it, but she had gone out. I called out to Mom, and she said she didn't know where she was either. This made both me and Mom very concerned. We called out to her, no answer. We went outside but couldn't see her. So we decided to check out the barn and sheds. She wasn't in the barn, but when we opened the door to one of the sheds, we were horrified to see her huddled in a corner, her face buried in her knees, hidden by her hair, crying. I can't even begin to describe how scared I felt to see my little sister like that. Mom was also confused. We didn't know what was going on with her. She'd never behaved like this before. This was very unlike her. What's even worse is that she absolutely refused to go back in that house. I grabbed her hand and tried to pull her home, telling her she was being stupid, but then she screamed hysterically and we had to give up. Eventually, we had to drive her to the airport because she had insisted on going back to the grandparents' house, and she did not want to ever set foot in that house again. And so the grandparents had agreed to pick her up once she arrived. Mom just didn't know what to do after that. It was just one inexplicable, odd incident, and it had turned everything upside down, it seemed. I didn't know what was going on, but I know I had to go back up to the attic and look for that doll and destroy the thing because I was convinced now that it was responsible for Jess's strange condition. That night, I sat up with Mom talking about the whole thing. And we'd since contacted Jess, and she was fine now that she was, with our grandparents at their house. But the strange thing she said is that she didn't remember what had happened at the house, except that she had just felt really strange, scared, and like this black cloud was inside her head. And all she wanted to do was get out of there. She didn't remember saying anything about a doll, and I didn't remind her of what she had told me either, about it grinning and so on, because I didn't want to traumatize her again. But I told Mom. She got really scared and said that we needed to destroy the doll. We agreed that we'd go back up to the attic the next morning and look for it again. That night, after Mom went to bed, I decided to go up there alone and see if I could find it myself. For whatever reason, I felt I needed to do it right then and not wait till morning. I took some sage with me and burned it outside the attic door at the top of the stairs, trying to summon up the courage to go in, really. I even said a prayer, and then, holding my breath, I opened the creaking door and flipped on the light switch of the dim light. I looked at the chair, and there was no doll. I walked over, looked behind it again, on the floor, the shelves, etc. There was no sign of anything. I spent more than 20 minutes looking in every area up there. But then, suddenly, the door to the attic slammed shut. My heart just leapt into my mouth as I rushed, panicking to the door, and grabbed the handle, pulling it to open. It wouldn't budge. It was like the handle was jammed or something. I looked behind me at the chair and the window behind it, but noticed the little window was closed, so no gust of air could have wafted through the room and slammed the door shut. At that point, I just felt a really deep sense of dread, like something was going to happen. I was terrified at this point, and I kept pulling at that door to open, but it was stuck. By this time, the light was flickering, and I had a horrible thought that it might go out. Part of me almost found this amusing in a sick kind of way, because it reminded me of this scary movie I had once watched, and it was like something was playing a joke on me. Sure enough, the light went out, and with shaking hands in the darkness, I reached quickly for my pocket and was relieved to find my cell phone. I pulled it out and turned on the flashlight. I didn't have the courage to look at the chair in case that hideous doll was there. Suddenly, I heard Mom scream at the top of her lungs. With a sense of urgency now and a kind of courage that was stronger than my fear, I grabbed the door handle and pulled it with more strength than ever. It released and opened, and I fell on the floor, scrambled to my feet, and screamed out, "Mom! Mom! I'm coming!" She screamed again, calling out my name. I practically jumped down those stairs as I grabbed the railings. I ran to Mom's room and opened the door so violently that the handle broke. The lights were out and the room was almost dark. I stood panting, looking wild-eyed at her bed in the dim moonlight. She was just laying there, seemingly asleep. I called her, no answer. I rushed over and grabbed her, shaking her. She was asleep or unconscious, but she was breathing. She must have fainted, I thought. I looked around the room but couldn't see clearly, so I turned on the bedside lamp. She was definitely unconscious, but she looked so pale, like Jess had done. I thought I heard something move in the room at that point. Perhaps a rat or something, because we didn't have pets. So I turned to look at the corner of the room, to the left of the foot of the bed area. There, on a chair, stood the doll, its vacant eye socket staring at me. But this time, there was a horrific grin on its face that I can't to this day even bear to think about. All I remember was grabbing Mom, throwing her over my shoulder somehow, and running out of there with a superhuman speed and strength. I ran down those stairs as fast as I could, and then I ran out of the front door of the house to the car, and I opened the car door and put Mom into the back seat. But then I realized that unfortunately, the car keys were inside the house in her purse. Her purse was likely hanging on the coat hanger by the front door. I told myself all I had to do was rush in, grab the purse, and get out. Adrenaline surged through me as I ran to the door, opened it, sprang to the hanger where I could see the purse, and rushed back towards the door, just as it was about to close. I grabbed it by the sides, pushing my foot in between the door and the frame to keep it from closing on me, and I tried to pull it open, but a powerful invisible force was trying to shut it so that I couldn't get out, and I thought my foot would be crushed. I was grateful I had put boots on. I just screamed out, "God, help me!" And with renewed strength, I pulled the door enough so that I could squeeze out through the wide gap. It slammed shut behind me. I ran to the car. Mom was still unconscious in the back. I started the engine, stared up at the house for a split second, and noticed the red light in the attic window. The light up there had not been red the first time I had turned it on. I sped out of there, shooting gravel behind us. I drove for about an hour without stopping. My hands seemed frozen to the steering wheel. Once I had calmed down, I cried, tears streaming down my face as I drove. I could hear Mom moaning slightly in the back seat, but I knew that she was kind of, partly asleep. I drove to an area of the city that was busiest with nightlife and lights everywhere, and I found a hotel in the busy area that was brightly lit. I parked in the parking lot, but I decided that first, before going into the hotel, I had to get Mom conscious again. I got out and went to the back seat, propping her up. I smacked her face a bit, and called her, and eventually she opened her eyes. They were kind of hazy and confused at first, like she didn't know what was going on or where she was. But soon, she regained full consciousness. I told her I found her unconscious in her room and that there was something bad in that house and we needed to get out, and that's why I drove out. She just started crying and she told me what had happened, and, I was glad that she actually remembered. She said that she had just turned off the light in her room, and she went to bed, when something all of a sudden just jumped on the bed and attacked her. She felt tiny hands grabbing at her throat and trying to strangle her. She tried to push this thing off and screamed, but it again attacked, only it was stronger this time. And then she passed out. I looked at her throat, and sure enough, there were red marks forming, bruises from the attack. She was a nervous wreck, and I held her as she just sobbed her heart out. She said she knew without a doubt that that thing would have killed her if I hadn't walked in the room that moment. We never set foot inside that house again. We had movers go over and pack all our stuff, and I specifically asked them not to pack any old dolls that they might see there. We put the house up for sale. It sold fast. But last we heard, there had been an accident and the house had burnt down. We had mentioned to the realtor that it was a haunted house, but who knows if she actually told the new buyers. All I can say is that it took the three of us a long time to recover from the trauma of the event. And we went to a therapy group for people who have, been traumatized by experiences with the paranormal. We're doing fine now, but occasionally Jess still has nightmares where she sees the doll standing in the chair in the attic staring at her. She wakes up screaming. Fortunately, this is happening less and less now, and my hope is that we will eventually put all this completely behind us and just get on with our lives. These days, I can't go anywhere in the dark unless there are people around. I'm okay at our new house, but if we go and stay anywhere else, I get really nervous. I'll never set foot inside an old rural house again. I know this for sure.
Oh.